Hey, welcome to Slingin Pixels, Tales from the Graphic Design Trenches. Today I'm going to talk about my favorite quote regarding creativity. Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And this was by a man named Antoine de Saint-Exupery. Is that how you say it? I don't know. I'm sorry, Tony. I'm sure I'm murdering the pronunciation. He was a French author and an aviator during World War II. His most famous book was called The Little Prince, published in 1943, about a year before his plane was shot down during a reconnaissance mission. And that book, by the way, is a great short read that I'd recommend for pretty much anybody. It's considered a children's book, but it's actually deeply philosophical. Anyway, his quote, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away," is so important to anyone involved in any kind of creative endeavor, but especially graphic designers. I mean, think about it. The best logos are usually the ones that are the most simple. They include only as much as is necessary to convey the offerings, intent, and personality of the organization. Now let's look at some of the most popular logos in history and see if this applies. Apple, of course, has probably one of the most identifiable logos of all time. It's basically just two shapes. Could you make it more complex?
Hell yeah.
If you need proof of that, look at Apple's original logo, designed by employee Ronald Wayne in 1976. It's a beautiful piece of art, but way too complicated for the number of ways that it would eventually be used. Imagine trying to use this logo on their minimalist products, or even social media for that matter. It'd be a nightmare. That said, again, as an illustration, it rocks the universe. Apple's current logo was designed by Rob Janoff in 1977, and it's much simpler and effective at any size. It's literal in the sense that it's obviously an apple, and it looks very simple at first glance. But despite being just two shapes, it's not as simple as it appears. A missing byte has proved to be very important because it's created a certain mythology regarding the logo. Some people believe it's a tribute to computer pioneer Alan Turing. Now, that's a long story that I'll let you look into if you're interested. And I encourage you to do so because it's fascinating, but it's also a very sad story. Others believe it references Sir Isaac Newton getting hit in the head with an apple, which supposedly led him to develop the concept of gravity. I suppose that's possible considering that the original logo featured that very scene. Still others believe that it represents the birth of knowledge from the Bible story about Adam and Eve. Now both Apple and Rob Janoff insist that none of that is true. Janoff stated that the real reason for the byte was to show scale so people would know that it's an apple and not a cherry. The point is, the real reason doesn't matter. It's created at least 3 different urban legends, and that's publicity you can't buy. So applying the quote to the Apple logo, is it possible to add more?
Yeah.
Even the first version of the two shapes logo was a bit more complex because it was always shown in rainbow colors. In fact, I'm not even sure they had a one-color version at that time. And it almost universally included the Apple word mark. It was actually the shape of the A in that word mark that created the byte. As all brands do, it continued to evolve over the years. In 1994, they dropped the stylized word mark, and in 1998, they simplified it yet again by shifting from the rainbow colors to just one color. Another great example is the Nike swoosh logo, designed in 1971 by Carolyn Davidson, a graphic design student at Portland State University. Imagine designing one of the most successful and recognizable logos ever before you even graduated from college. And how much was she paid for this design? $35. And founder Phil Knight didn't even like the logo at first, but he was under a time crunch and decided that it would grow on him. And it must have, because in 1983, he gave Davidson 500 shares of Nike stock that's worth well over $1 million today. And I'd be willing to bet that's the most any pixel slinger has ever been paid for a logo design. They don't get much simpler than the Nike logo. One shape that conveys speed and movement without being complicated. It's brilliant. The one big difference between the Apple and Nike logos is that Apple is very literal. There's no doubt that it's an apple. Now Nike, if you don't know, is the Greek goddess of victory. Now, certainly, Davidson could have gone very literal and drawn the full body of the goddess, but that would have been way too complex. Instead, she focused on just one part, the wing. Now, that was really clever because it simplified the design and zoomed in on the part of the goddess that made her so fast. Again, brilliant, and exemplifies the Saint-Exupery quote perfectly. Carolyn Davidson got rid of everything except the part that was vitally important to the message. Speed equals victory. That's even more important when you consider the fact that Nike originally only made track shoes. Another example of the importance of simplicity is packaging. If you have a product sitting on a shelf with a bunch of other products, you need yours to stand out if it's going to be successful. Now, some designers think that standing out means putting every possible Photoshop effect on every element of the package as humanly possible. But the truth is, sometimes what sets one design apart from the others is the lack of flashy effects. There's a reason why breathing room is such a powerful concept to pixel slingers. Breathing room is created by simplicity. There's a great video from several years back that very humorously illustrates this by fantasizing about what the original iPod box would look like if it was designed by Microsoft. Now, Microsoft, if you don't know, is not exactly famous for aesthetic design. That's putting it nicely. And when you look at the fictional Microsoft version and ask, could I take something away from this? The answer is, hell yes. Most of it could and should go. And when you look at the actual Apple version and ask the same, the answer is pretty much no. It's perfect as is. I'll post a link to the video below. Check it out. It is really funny. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, we as pixel slingers don't always have the final say in our design. And one place where this is particularly true is product packaging. And while we get to design the art, we rarely have any say over the amount of info that goes on the package, and that's where the ugly creeps in. We aren't usually given the thumbs up to start kicking bits and bobs off the box in order to make it look cleaner. I had one client who insisted that I create a package that looked a lot more like the Microsoft version of the iPod box I mentioned earlier. Despite my arguments about simplicity, they couldn't bring themselves to drop any of the text that made it overly complicated, so I don't consider that box to be successful. While I liked my design, I didn't include the box in my portfolio. Someday I might revise the final version that went to press and get rid of the excessive text, give it some breathing room, and then add that to my portfolio. And there's no shame in doing that. Keep in mind that when an employer is looking at your portfolio, they're looking at what you designed, not what you were forced to design. There's a difference. Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. I hope you'll write that down and remember it, because there's so much wisdom in that quote. Another along the same lines is by Leonardo da Vinci. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. You might even think about including these two quotes when making a proposal to a boss or a client. Seeing that it's kind of a universal design principle can be quite impressive and might make a difference to the decision makers. That's all for now. Thanks for tuning in to Slingin Pixels. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button, and better yet, subscribe to my channel to hear more tales from the graphic design trenches. If you have any quotes that have inspired you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Later.